Thank you for watching the Atkinson Gazette. I'm your host, Michael Boucher. I wanted to learn what was happening at Kimball Library, how it serves our community, and what resources are needed to operate the library. I sat down with Karen Brown, the director of Kimball Library, who provided detailed answers in our interview. Hello everyone, I am here with Karen Brown, the library director for Kimball Library. I am Michael Boucher, host of the Atkinson Gazette, and I'm so glad to be able to sit down and have this interview with you. How are you today?
I'm very well, Michael. Thank you so much for your interest. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation.
Great, awesome. I think first of all, to start off with is what do you do as a library director?
A director is in charge of all aspects of a library's functioning. So working collaboratively with our very talented staff, I establish the priorities and make sure that we're serving Atkinson to the very best, to the very best level we possibly can. The quality of our programs, collections, and customer service are my responsibility. I manage the budget, the staff, and the care of the buildings and grounds. I also work to advise the trustees about what current best practices are in libraries and draft policies for their consideration. And it's the role of the director to be very knowledgeable about national trends and new initiatives so that we can be sure we're offering the very best in current services for the community.
Okay, sounds good. I think you've touched upon this a little bit, but I would imagine as library director, you have to work your way up to get to this role. So what expertise do you bring to this position?
Well, I've been a professional librarian for 31 years, meaning I have a master's degree in library science. 27 years were in leadership positions. And I've just been so fortunate in my library career. I've worked for suburban towns and a large city. I've managed a small branch and a large urban system with 7 locations and 120 employees. So I've actually retired from that latter part of my career, and I'm really happy to be the director.
How long have you been the library director here at Kimball Library?
It'll be 4 years in March. March 9th. I came, and a few days later, we had to shut the library down for COVID, so it was a very interesting introduction. Very glad that's in the rearview mirror.
But with your experience, I mean, it probably wasn't that much of a trouble to navigate that difficult.
I'm really proud of how we handled that. We really flipped on a dime to being able to offer services online. We made our own story hours and filmed them and put them out there. We found ways to get books into the hands of people. And we were one of the first libraries in the area to reopen and to reopen fully. So yeah, I think we did a great job.
COVID sort of reminds me of, that obviously libraries do in fact face challenges. I think a lot of them just assume that, they just have the books and the movies or whatever else, and it's just a source of information. But I imagine there are challenges that the library does face that people are not aware of. Could you maybe talk about some of those challenges?
Sure. 2 challenges for the Kimball Library that I'm really focused on right now are the budget, and also sort of what's going on with libraries nationally. So with regard to the budget, from 2019 through 2022, the library's budget increased an average of 0%. 4 years, 0%. And 2023 was a year where the budget increased, but it was largely to handle fixed increases in things like utilities. So 2024 is really about trying to catch up operationally, and from 5 years now, really it's 0 growth budget. And we need to make some corrections in our operational side of our budget, and we need to adjust a couple of salaries.
Before we address the other part of the challenges that you described,
Sure.
Why is it that there was 0 growth in the library budget?
Well, towns tend to really focus on safety and, of course, education. And so sometimes the library can be kind of set aside from times of crisis. During COVID, we were asked for a 5% give back, which amounted to $25,000. So that's part of that 0 average. I think people don't understand enough about what goes into libraries. I think there's this sort of old notion that, any genteel person can sit behind a desk and check out a couple of books. What could be involved? And it's so much more sophisticated than that. It really requires staff that have special expertise and what age group they're working with. It requires funding for excellent collections, and in these times, there's a lot of pressure for digital collections. So you buy it in print, then you have to turn around and buy it as a digital copy too. So that's been a big factor. Libraries are all about technology, which means we need to have current computing capacity. That's a place where this library is really quite far behind. We're hoping to make adjustments. For example, our computer line hasn't been adjusted since 2016. And you know what prices have been like since 2016. And we have 26 computers. So with that level of funding, we were able to purchase one computer last year and some peripherals. So this is the kind of thing that we were working on. The budget committee recently asked department heads for a 5% cut. A 5% cut for us would have meant laying off staff and losing significant numbers of hours. It's the only place where there's anything to give. So we couldn't manage a 5%, and I'm not sure any other department managed 5% either, but we always try to cooperate. So we did return in our budget, in the draft budget, $2,200, which doesn't sound like much, but it represents 16% of the increase we're looking for on operations side. So I think you just get to a place where, you understand there's a larger situation in town and you're a part of that and you're trying to be a team player. Libraries are famous for being frugal and super respectful of taxpayer dollars, which is as it should be. It's sort of a special trust, the work of the taxpayer. But you get to a place where you can't sustain 5 years of not having adequate funding and continue to protect the public from feeling it. And so I'm concerned that's where we're headed.
Since you've mentioned that, I kind of want to take a step back. You mentioned that for 3 years or 4 years, it was
0% average.
0% average. Now it's a 5% average. But what does that 5% average before or after you made that 16% cut from?
No, the budget committee asked all department heads to go back to their budgets. This was maybe 3 weeks ago, and look for a 5% cut. So, that's, as I say, catastrophic for us. And I don't think that was their intention. The library budget increase overall, if it were to pass today, after the 2,200 being taken out, is 9.2%. So that's still under what the budget committee would like it to not be above 10. And of course, they'd like it even less, but realistically, so we're in compliance there. The other really important thing about the budget that I want to talk about are staff salaries. So in 2022, the Board of Selectmen really committed to paying staff competitive wages. And lots of wages across all departments in town, except the library, were adjusted. We adjusted one. But in general, they looked at all the wages after doing research that were not competitive, and they made adjustments to them. So we have 2 salary positions that need a one-time correction to come within the town's priority of equitable wages. One of them is $5.05 an hour, and the other is $3.85 an hour.
Those are the increases.
Those are the increases.
Okay.
Yeah. And, to give this some context, the lowest wage increase that happened last year for an hourly wage was more than $9 an hour. So we're still frugal. And some people are really focused on the percents. And the percent is 18% for one and 11.5% for the other. Percentages can be misleading because it all depends what your starting point was.
Right.
I just gave back 25% of my postage to the town, but that amounted to $50 because the whole thing was so small to begin with. So these adjustments represent, I think, these percents really how extreme the situation has become. They are not about trying to pay extravagant new wages. And I have to say, both of the individuals involved are just superstar employees. They've got decades of experience. They've worked here for a very long time. They're very known and respected in the community. They both wear 2 leadership hats. They're paid for one. And they just contribute hugely to the success of this library. So I really hope that people will support this, because to not, and I know this wouldn't be intentional, but to not make these adjustments in these wages when the town addressed all this last year is basically saying that the town is committed to paying equitable and competitive wages, except at the library. Residents use this town, use this library heavily. They love the library. They love the staff. I don't think it's the residents' intention to sort of uniquely penalize these two individuals.
Well, part of the reason why we're speaking, I don't think the community at large maybe even knows what's happening.
Right.
I'm glad we're able to sit down and you're able to share that information.
Yeah.
One of the challenges the other challenge that you said that the library is dealing with, and you were saying roughly at a national level, there are issues going on. Can you kind of describe what those issues are?
Sure. Nationally and increasingly in New Hampshire, libraries are really struggling with the consequences of a very small but very vocal group in the country who are accusing libraries of having an extreme left agenda. It's very important to understand that these talking points are coming from a national and well-funded campaign, and it's the same folks who are interested in book bans. So the consequence of that is really heartbreaking, I think, because it's, they're having some success. You have to give them credit, even though they're a very small segment of our society, in painting libraries in this way. And it is heartbreaking to me, that there's anyone who thinks libraries have a political agenda, because the exact opposite is true. It is a core tenet of librarianship to be strictly neutral. Strictly. And if you think about it, the goal is for every resident to feel welcome and comfortable in their library, right? So libraries can't afford to be associated with any particular point of view, political or religious. It's just, it's a terrible disservice to get that idea out there. I worry it's...
One of the things that I've noticed when it comes to the idea of all these book bans is that they're presenting a problem that didn't exist before. It's kind of baffling to me that the idea of these book bans have come out. We have to ban certain books because there are supposedly certain materials out there that are inappropriate for certain age groups or demographics, whatnot. But there, of course, those books are never found. Well, let me ask you this question: has this particular library experienced anyone trying to ban particular books or particular content? And if so, how has the library addressed that? And furthermore, has there ever been any evidence of any of that material or any of that content needing to be banned within this library?
We have not had an actual challenge, although I was asked in the middle of a budget presentation, apropos of nothing, if we have sexually explicit books in the children's room, which we do not. So where does that question come from? We're kind of out of left field. Mm-hmm. And, people are hearing these talking points. I did have a gentleman come in, I think it was in the fall, and he came in a little agitated, and he said, I want to see your children's room. I understand you have displays of grooming materials. And then I want to take some pictures. I said, good, let's go have a look. Well, it only took him a couple of minutes to see there was no such thing in the library, but I honor him so much because he came to find out for himself. He asked his questions. Let me speak a little bit about book bans historically. Obviously we look at history, and there have been attempts to ban books, and they've often been associated with sort of authoritarian moments in our history. They're not good. I don't think it's an American concept to censor books. I think what's happening this time is that you have that small contingent of people who want to decide what's appropriate for everybody based on their particular values and worldview. And they're entitled to those. They're just not entitled to dictate to everybody else that we can't access materials that they personally are interested in, don't approve of. A second core principle of librarianship is that we really believe and work from an understanding that only a family can decide what materials are appropriate for their children and when they're appropriate. But they can only decide for their family, not anyone else's. And what's going on with this, I don't want to call it a movement, I don't want to give it that dignity, because really it's a small group of people that are just very skilled at making a big noise. And and they have damaged a lot of libraries around the country successfully. So that is very. But what they're interested in doing is deciding for everyone's child. Here's what's appropriate for children in America.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just really inappropriate. We respect that families have different values, different notions of when they want their children exposed to different things, if or ever. Mm-hmm. And that is their right. It is not appropriate for any other group of people to be making those decisions for everything.
Right. And as you were saying earlier, also, you as a library director and every other staff member here, you're trying to maintain that neutrality. Like you mentioned before, I think you were saying that the budget committee sort of kind of accused the library of having like some sort of partisanship. And of course, you can't do that based on.
Absolutely. No, we can't. The library's mission is to provide high quality information that represents a broad range of viewpoints so that a citizen can come in and explore a topic, read this point of view, read that point of view, read points of view that are in the middle, and make up their own mind. And I think that's a very American thing. Our libraries are tied to the founding of our country because the founders understood that to have a successful democracy, you have to be able to have a literate electorate. Exactly so. They could, evaluate information and come to a conclusion and vote. Did I lose track of some other question there?
No. You definitely answered the question. And this is maybe sort of a weird pivot, but we were talking about budgets before, and there was one incident that happened during one of the budget committee meetings where one of the members mentioned removing particular due that the library pays, and the due was for the American Library Association. Now, I think a lot of people are completely unfamiliar with what the association is and what they do for the library.
Yeah.
So, could you explain what the ALA is, why the library currently has a membership with them, and I guess in addition to that, what benefits does the ALA have, for this library in terms of informing what maybe some of the operations you do here?
Sure. Let's start about what happened. A member accused the American Library Association, ALA, of being Marxist and promoting drag queen story hours. And therefore, this person felt that membership in ALA didn't deserve taxpayer support. So they deducted $162 from our budget, the price of our one membership in ALA, typically the director of the library, in a 4-3 vote. So it's very unfortunate. I really regret that folks had that concern on the budget committee. 4 people did anyway, and nobody came to talk to me about ALA because I really think information would have settled these concerns. I'm sure they were sincerely believe what they said and probably still do. But the trouble is, it's beliefs. It is their beliefs. It is not factual. ALA is not Marxist, and ALA does not, dictate local policies or programming. What ALA is the National Organization for Librarians. It's like the American Bar Association or the American Medical Association. It's almost 150 years old, has 50,000 members across the country. And it is a non-partisan 501c3 non-profit that works to promote literacy and an informed society so that free people can read freely. And that's what it did. And they're very focused on the literacy component for young people. In fact, ALA received, I'm going to look at this because I'm getting the name wrong, the Barbara Bush National Literacy Award this year. precisely for their really significant efforts in foreign literacy. So that was what happened. The accusation of Marxism stems from a tweet the outgoing president made where she described herself as a Marxist. But I think it's very important, and I did explain this, or attempt to explain this to the Budget Committee, to understand that the president of ALA is largely a ceremonial role and serves for 1 term only, 1 year only. Any decision that gets made directionally or policy-wise from ALA has to be passed with a 15-member executive board, that the president is one member of, and 131 member council. So it's just not remotely credible, not remotely credible that one person in a 1-year term could have that kind of influence. She couldn't convert ALA to Marxism or anything else. It's just, honestly, it's ridiculous. It's just not possible.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very sad, though, that, to put that information out there, because people don't know what ALA is. So what ALA does, we get a tremendous amount of value out of our membership. A membership in ALA is the only way to access the national journals for librarians. It's the only way for us to learn about the successes and failures happening in other libraries so we can all benefit from them. So instead of the Kimball Library trying to dream up a new program and then figure out how to implement it, we can learn how somebody did it in Kansas and, benefit from what worked for them, what didn't work for them, think about whether it would apply to this community. It's essential for keeping us current and up to date. It also provides research on national trends that affect technology, collections, programs, facilities, staff. Our service would be really diminished if we didn't have access to that kind of information. We would, over time, sort of drift to the margins in terms of what we're offering the community. So it's really important. I honestly think for all the benefits we get from ALA, $162 is a bargain, and it's totally worthy of taxpayer support.
How long has this library used or paid for the ALA membership?
My understanding is, it's been a very long time, certainly in the previous director's time and my time, so I think that works out to something like 14 years anyway. It's not controversial.
So, very similar to the book bans. It's something that's discussed maybe nationally amongst very few people, but when it comes to actually coming up with evidence of any sort of wrongdoing, it doesn't exist. Libraries have been existing without controversial books, or rather, putting controversial material in front of the wrong demographic, for example, and the ALA basically being neutral and providing resources has always been that way since over 150 years, if I remember correctly. Right?
I do want to tell you that because our job is to provide a range of points of view, accurate quality information, but a range of points of view, there are things that are guaranteed to offend. There are books here that I don't want to read because I don't agree with the viewpoint that it represents. So it's not that everything in the library is vanilla, because it can't be and serve the entire community. But it's not. There's a real thing in public libraries, and always has been, called community standards. That's why libraries have never collected pornography. Why we don't have sexually explicit materials here, or materials that are, about how to build a bomb, or, violence, that in any way that would promote it. We purchase things that we think will be beneficial to this community. I actively look for a range of points of view. And our collection development policy is something people obviously wouldn't have reason to pay much attention to, but it's on our website, so anyone can look at it. And anything that the library purchases or adds to the collection has to have a positive professional review. And we have review journals for people who are expert around a certain topic, or experts in fiction, and review writers talk about these different materials. And that's very important because it means that the taxpayer dollars are well spent, right? Buying quality materials, whatever points of view or experience they might represent, they're of high quality. And they're not subject to my personal bias or somebody else here who's collecting their bias. You wouldn't want that, to have a librarian for 10 years buying what she or he thought. These are cool books, and I don't buy these over there because I don't like. So being neutral and being focused on quality products is a baseline for libraries.
Okay. Two follow-up questions.
Yeah.
The first one is I'm unfamiliar with the process in which materials chosen for the library.
Sure.
So in that process, is there like a committee of individuals who help determine what materials are appropriate and are not appropriate? And then secondarily, if there's a particular, we'll say book or magazine, whatever, that you don't have, could an individual request it?
Sure. So let me answer the second part first. People can request it if it's new, but we don't buy retrospectively. I'm not going to buy a novel from 1985 because I can get that for you for free. Another library in the state that has it. But if it's a new book, I'm happy to buy it if it meets that criteria. It has to have a positive professional review. So I have to turn down requests to say, I'm sorry, I currently can't locate a good review. If that changes, I'm happy to reconsider. And of course, it's hard for people to hear that a book they're interested to read basically isn't good enough for the library to buy. That's an awkward thing. It doesn't make anybody happy. But we are able to buy a lot of the materials that people ask for, and it's helpful. It's not buying somebody a personal book. If I didn't think that other people in the community were interested in it too, then I wouldn't buy it. We can't spend taxpayer dollars that way. But it's very possible that I missed something, or that some book that came out 12 months ago didn't get any attention has now caught on and is getting attention. So I'm very happy to get those. The process here for purchasing books is that any staff member can suggest a book. Kathy Watson is responsible for any book in the youth collection. She doesn't pick them all herself, but she has oversight of everything. And she has a lot of expertise in knowing these books are of interest in this community, these books aren't. Every community has its own taste. Science fiction and fantasy, for example, here don't go. I've looked in other communities where they were crazy popular. So, we have to pay attention to what the community actually wants. Lois Powers picks out all the DVDs. She does a beautiful job. And then I basically pick out everything else for the adult collection. And I have oversight of what Lois is doing. The appropriate is really about, they aren't reviewing inappropriate materials. So for the most part, that kind of takes care of that. And then the other aspect of appropriateness is it appropriate to the tastes and interests of this community? Would I buy a novel by a brand new author from Thailand? No, because I don't think people are going to come in and take it up. So it would be a good use of it. And the other piece of appropriateness is parental involvement. I understand people are busy and want their children to be safe, and it's difficult, in the age of the internet and social media. Thankful my children didn't grow up in that time, honestly. But there's just no way to have it set up so somebody else does that for you. The best way to protect your children is to be actively involved in the reading choices, viewing choices they make, and we do everything we can to encourage that. You can't come here unless you're 10, unescorted. And most 10-year-olds don't have their own library cards. It's really this idea that children are wandering in and taking out crazy, inappropriate things just really isn't a thing. Most parents, we explain to parents when they're thinking about giving their child a library card that as soon as you have your own card, you are entitled to the legal protections of privacy. And that's because you have no idea when an individual may need privacy. For one person, it might be when they're 14 and they have some sensitive issue they need to get some information about. Somebody else, they could be 32. And since we don't know, we begin as we plan to go. And also, it's part of hoping we're going to have a lifelong relationship with somebody. So we want to teach a child and have them be able to count on it for their full life, that we respect their intellectual explorations and they're private. We aren't going to tell people what they have have checked out. However, we do explain all this to parents, and some parents will decide, my child doesn't need their own card yet. Other parents will put their own emails on the account. They set them up with their pins, etc., so they have total access all the time to see what their children have checked out. And that's between the parent and the child. The important thing is the librarian doesn't just hand that information. But parents are free to set up those systems so that they do them. So I just don't honestly think that's a legitimate concern that children are wandering in here unescorted, taking out crazy, inappropriate materials.
As you mentioned before, just like that gentleman who had questions, I mean, if any parent does have questions, they should just come in and ask. Great.
Totally. I wish people would come in and talk about any concern, idea, wish they have for the library. I'm delighted to talk with anyone. My office door is open most of the time, and I've started holding office hours once a month so that I can be here in the evening to try to be more available when folks are working. That's my job, to be answerable to the community, help people understand what the library is about and be open to their suggestions.
Also, here in Atkinson, there aren't too many central places for the community to gather. We have community center, obviously, it's involved in the name, community can show up there. With the commons over here, and then I would say Kimball Library is the other community gathering place. So, what role do you believe Kimball Library serves in our community, and what role do you see it being for the foreseeable future?
Well, I hear people call it a heart of the community, and I think that's true. Libraries serve folks from birth to death, and we work hard to provide that beautiful collection that's interesting, that's accurate, that has something for everybody in town. It gives people a way to travel by reading. They can't afford to go on their own, they're not interested. You can explore any topic, you can understand other people's experience through reading fiction. Really it's the way that you can live in a small, cozy town and still have access to the universe of ideas and art. I think people come here because they are interested in our services, but then they meet their neighbors and they make new friends. And we've seen people who come to the library where we're not sure about this might be their only opportunity to have a conversation with someone. We used to have the local hardware store, the small grocery store, lots of church activity. And, we've lost some of those things. The local business sector, for example. It's not cozy, intimate experience it might have once been. So I think you're right. There are institutions in town like the library, like the community center, and of course there are churches, but, those opportunities are shrinking. So I think the library will continue to play a role, just maybe more so than they have in the past. Very long time ago, it's much more about the materials and about keeping materials safe. But the public library in America is really about access. Come in and use our things. If it wears out, great. That was a very successful purchase on our part. We can get another one. We have comfortable furniture. We try to have the building set up so that people can be separate or together. Being a community gathering place is a really important aspect. I understand real estate agents bring people here to kind of cement the deal. Because this library is amazing for a small town. I understand it's easy to take libraries for granted. In some ways, we should all be able to do that. But I understand what it takes to build a library like this. It's not an automatic process. It takes Herculean efforts by so many people over so many years. Concerned citizens, staff, volunteers, friends, and taxpayer support to build a really successful special library. And that's what Kimball is. We are outrageously successful. This year, we expect to have 40,000 visits. That's an increase of, I think, 25% over last year. 25%. And we will loan more than 55,000 items. That's an increase of 22%. And we will have more than 1,000 programs with 13,000 attendees. That's up 51%. I mean, those are astonishing numbers for a library, especially of this size. And, the community really loves the library. We did a community survey a year ago, hoping to get some feedback that might help us to improve. And it was, well, wasn't actually that much opportunity to missing this entire segment of service. We can focus on that. The 99% of people who responded believe the library is important to the community, and 97% to them personally. The staff received an approval rating of 97%. I mean, stop and think about it. What business or institution can you think of where the staff has a 97% approval rating? It's really a dazzling success story, the Kimball Library. And it's truly a community achievement because it does take all those players and the taxpayers. So it's the property of the community, it's an achievement of the community, it's a tremendous resource for the community, but it's a fragile thing. I've learned this in my 30 years. I mean, you can have a fantastic library that has taken so much spectacular effort to get it to this place. And, without sufficient taxpayer support or staff changes, it can be quite fragile. It can change. That's why I'm concerned. And after 5 years, it's time, I think, for the library to be able to stop spending the energy we do on how can we manage with this degree of funding and, just hope our staff won't leave because it'd be so hard to replace them with the wages that we have had. Instead of being able to focus on, here's how we can improve. Here's a new service Atkinson might love. It would be really nice to be engaged in that forward thinking. I'm optimistic that this is going to be we will be able to stop playing defense so much financially and really begin to focus on moving forward, improving, looking for new ways to be of service.
Well, I was hoping that was going to be my last question, but I had another thought. And I want to end this on a high note, but unfortunately it's not. So you mentioned all these glowing, details about, what the library does for the community. You didn't mention some of the services, like, I know some of the services as a resident.
Sure.
You have concerts, for example, you have the events for all the kids, you host all these events, like the candidates night for the state reps, you had that. At one moment, you have all these informational sessions that people get all sorts of different value of. And then you're still working with these very tight budgets where there's no growth. And I'm sort of putting you on the spot here.
Go ahead.
What is the number that puts all of that in jeopardy? All of the things that the Kimball Library provides for this community?
I think if we have another year where we can't catch up operationally with lines like the computer funding, new equipment funding, youth programs, those were 3 areas we really tried to make some headway with in this budget. I don't have the funding to replace a printer that dies. I don't have the funding to replace fragile computers. So those things go, and you look around and think, well, okay, can I shift from here to there, blah blah blah. But when it's been so tight for so long, you get to a point where there isn't anything to shift. For example, the materials budget, that's increased the last 2 years, but it's only increased by the bill that the library gets from the state for access to their downloadable collection, which is a tremendous bargain. We could never afford to buy that collection ourselves. It represents 20% of circulation now. So the library hasn't had any increase in the cost of books and DVDs and books on CD, magazines, newspapers. The cost for all those things have gone up, but we haven't asked for an increase. It's really been about this fixed increase that comes from the state. So, I think the library, there's this balance, right? You want to be a responsible citizen. You want to be, a responsible team player and not burden the taxpayers in any way that's not really necessary to be excellent. And you can get to a point where you're so used to, living small like that and trying so hard not to ask for things that don't feel tenable, that you start not asking for what you truly need. So with this budget, we really tried to do. Okay, let's get real. Let's look at this computer budget. Let's look at our equipment line. Youth programs is something that the town has a small amount of money that they provide, but it hasn't been increased in years. And meanwhile, the cost of professional programs has gone up. And the Friends have, basically covered that over. But, that's not sustainable. And actually, it's required by RSA that the town provide sufficient support as determined by the trustees for core services, and youth programs is a core service. So you talked about all the things I haven't mentioned, and it's true, and they're legion, but meeting rooms get used all the time. The teen room is a really important collection in there. It's great the way the building is designed, where the teen room is sort of its own separate space. It's not near the children's room. It's not just incorporated in the adult section. They really have their own collection and their own place to be. We are a passport agency. We have a notary public. We offer private technology appointments. You can make an appointment and come in here with your device and have somebody sit down with you and sort out whatever's going on. We help people use databases. We're excited about a new database we're going to have this year. It's going to replace the older ones we have. It's not, a new level of expense, but it's going to provide access to the Globe daily. Like you can read today's Globe on this in this database. You can do it from home. You can do it here. It's also going to include the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post. Did I say that? So, basically the 6 major papers in the country plus the Globe. We think people are going to love that. You can learn a language here. Special things in the children's room that are really awesome for kids. We were able to increase our Launchpad collection this year through generous gift by Atkinson's Civic Club. That's kind of like an iPad. Kids feel like they're using some cool technology. They have educational apps on them, and they're very diverse, depending on where your child is at, kind of interests they have. The programming is huge. It's just huge. We have some professional programs come in. The concert series is certainly like that, and that's privately funded, very generously by the by the George family charities. But most of the programs we have here are either free, some of them are New Hampshire Humanities programs, or they're created by the staff. So they're very staff intensive. So to be able to offer 1,000 programs to this community, attract 15,000 people to come, is tremendous, just tremendous. And I think we have a really great collection. It's small, it's appropriate, but we have access to basically the libraries of New Hampshire, so we can get anything for you, almost anything. But I think the collections of high quality, both for children and for adults. We're good about that. Beautiful building, courtyard. Really, it's an amazing library. As I said, I'm a community achiever.
To be optimistic, it's if we were to maintain or want to improve this library, we have to be very serious about making sure that we properly fund it. Cannot have another year of basically no budget increase, and we need to be able to pay for the technology, we pay for youth services, and if I remember correctly, we also need to worry about salary lines as well, because we're kind of on the lower end of compensating for.
Well, and those 2 salaries in particular are really tough. Well, so in terms of, yes, the adequate funding is important, but I think also we need to be clear about what the library represents and what statements are not true. And I think, that national effort is waning a little. Americans do not approve of banning books. They don't. But I think it has gone to a place where it's so extreme that people are thinking, well, maybe that's a bridge. So I'm optimistic that's going to be.
Well, thank you, Karen Brown, for sitting down and speaking with me. It's been a pleasure. And I hope that everyone else who's watching this have more information about our library and understand the value that it has to our community. And
And if anybody has any questions, please come speak with me.
Definitely. Great. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this chat.
Yeah. Thank you.
The Atkinson Gazette is an independently produced program delivering information, interviews, and events in and around Atkinson. For more information about this program, you can go to facebook.com/Atkinson Gazette, or you can find this clip and many other clips on YouTube at Atkinson Gazette.